Hey, it's Bentley, and today we're going to go over the immune response flowchart for Module 6 for microbiology with Dr. Anna. So, as always, I'm going to do a quick review before we actually get into the content of the assignment. So, what is an immune response? So, immune response, we have different levels. So, we're going to start with innate immunity, and this is going to hold our first two lines of defense. And to break this down a little bit in layman's terms, it's our natural, non-specific form of immunity. It's what helps prevent us get sick before we actually get sick, and then it gets into more specific responses to then help us get better. So our first line of defense is our skin barrier, or also a mucous membrane. So, like your nose, you have a mucous membrane because it is exposed to the environment. And then we have our second line of defense, which is protective cells and internal defense lines. So you have chemical toxic responses if pathogens get past our skin barrier, as well as macrophages and phagocytes that then help protect us from getting further sick. And then our third line of defense is also called adaptive immunity, and we can break that down into two sections. So we have our cell-mediated immune response, which is predominantly our T cells, and I'll get into explaining that here in the next slide, as well as our antibody immune system, also known as our humoral response, which contains our B lymphocytes or our B cells. And all of these definitions and this information was sourced from the textbook, which you'll see on my resource slide. So like I mentioned, that I was going to break down B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, or B cells and T cells, down a little bit more. So for our B cells, they are our antibody immune system, and they attack our extracellular pathogens. So that means that it's any of the pathogens, that are found openly within the body. So they can move freely within our tissues and our organs going from place to place. So this helps attack those types of pathogens. And then we have our T cells. Like I mentioned before, it's part of our cell-mediated immune system, and they combat against our intracellular pathogens. So the T cells actually bind to these kinds of pathogens or foreign substances, and they prevent further infection to the rest of our body. So they kind of contain that pathogen or foreign substance from getting to our normal or healthy cells. Okay, so now getting into the material that we've all been waiting for is my flowchart for how the immune response happens. So we're going to start more in the innate immune system, and then we get more into the specific responses with the adaptive immunity down here. So we're going to follow the arrows, as you can see right here for this flowchart, to then where we get to the end. So we're going to start with the entry of the pathogen. So the entry of the pathogen, this means that it's gotten through our first line of defense. Like I mentioned before, it's gotten through a mucus membrane or open adhesion on our skin, and it's actually getting into our body. And so then the response of our innate immune system, it's then going to activate our second line of defense. And so that's going to include phagocytes, antimicrobial chemicals, and natural responses. So you could potentially have a fever or inflammation, or you could have symptoms like sneezing or having fatigue. And all of that's going to be initiated to then help combat against that pathogen that's entered our immune system. And so, if the pathogen then lives on and continues to survive within our body's environment, then the adaptive immunity is going to be engaged, meaning that it's gone through the first and second, and so now the third strike, you're out. So, the antigen's going to then be processed. So this is going to help prepare the antigen so then it can be recognized by the T cell. So then it can do its thing, which we'll get down to towards the end of the flowchart. And so now we're here at cell interaction. And this is when the cells are communicating through levels of secretion. This can also be through the central nervous system to then help combat against pathogens. So it's sending messages through the central nervous system or through secretions from cell to cell, letting each other know what's going on with the body, and that basically you're locking down the barriers so then you can uh, combat against the pathogen or infiltrator of your body. And this is done through cytokines. And this is a part of the cell's interaction that actually causes the secretion from one cell to another, that then helps trigger the specific immune response within the adaptive immunity. And then we have the activation of cells. So this is upon entry of the pathogen, so we're cycling back a little bit, and the signaling pathways are activated through the cytokines, therefore causing that immune response. So just kind of reiterating just a little bit more. So as we get into the specific responses of the adaptive immunity, we have B cell specific things that the B cell does. So two of those things is that the B cell can actually take characteristics, of an antigen, and it can then present itself to the T cell. So then it can be easier for the T cell to combat against that antigen or pathogen. Also, the B cells assist with that secretion of cytokines. All right, now getting into T cell specifics. After the recognition of a pathogen, the T cell can then eliminate the pathogen or disease present. It's also been known to help combat against cancerous types of pathogens. All right, and another one in our flow chart for T cell for its specific combatant against pathogens, it's sourced from the bone marrow. So it is specifically individualized from person to person, also depending on their exposure of different viruses. So if they've been exposed to, say, for example, COVID before, the second time that they get it, it might not be as bad because the body already knows how to react to it. And so getting into that, T and B cells, if they have a prolonged life within the body, then they have a level of memory of that exposure to then help with the immunity and combating against it. So that is all that I have for my flowchart on how the immune response happens. And last but not least, all of the resources that I used today to help get my PowerPoint and flowchart together was sourced from the textbook. So that is the Microbiology with Diseases, Volume 5. It's a Pearson edition by Bauman.